why do I want to through hike? There is nothing else that could like appease me to be able to experience the raw beauty and simultaneous terror of that storm, like reminded me how human I was. And never have I seen a mountain so moody before. So I get to understand this mountain and like now I have a relationship with her and can speak to that as well. And then there's also moments when I'm hiking across this great traverse and I look back, and as you look north, everything in your vision you have hiked. Like my footsteps have been connected to Canada, and this few moments that are lows where I'm like, oh wow, I'm humbled by what it means to be human in comparison to a mountain. But then 2 days later, being on top of another mountain 40 miles away and feeling so empowered and capable, it's this give and take with the landscape itself. That relationship that I get to form with the mountain is so life giving to me.
Hello, intrepid listeners, and welcome to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. I'm your host, Dale Simonson, and my guest today is a young woman, Grace Gallagher, who recently completed the Thru-Hiking Triple Crown. That's the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. 8,000 miles of hiking that she did in 3 years. Listen in and you'll hear how many steps that is, how many pairs of shoes it takes, and why you might want to give a good long hike in the great outdoors a try. Maybe not that long. In addition to great stories from her hikes, Grace shares some fascinating thoughts about nature and our interaction with it. You see, Grace is now a graduate student at Harvard Divinity School studying the human-spiritual relationship to land, and she taught me some really good perspective about nature that us modern-day Americans just never think about. Enjoy the show. Grace Gallagher, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Yeah, I would love to. I guess I'll start where I grew up. I try to hide the fact that I'm from Texas, but it's a great state. And I grew up in the city and I had no outdoor experience at all. But that changed in high school. I went on a backpacking trip. It changed my life. I got really involved in backpacking in high school and college. And then flash forward, and at the end of college, I decided to do a wacky thing. I decided to hike from Canada to Mexico on the Pacific Crest Trail, and I loved it so much. I hiked the AT the next year, the CDT the year after that. Yeah, that's my background as a thru hiker, kind of explaining a little bit about the abruptness to which I got into it.
Oh, I want to come back to that backpack trip you took in high school in a minute, but you just rattled off a bunch of little acronyms that our listeners may not know, AT, CDT. So you did the Triple Crown of thru hikes, and that's a huge deal. That's why I really wanted you on this show, because I would love to do each one of those. Tell us what that is. Tell us what those 3 hikes are.
Yeah, of course. I totally jumped right in. But the PCTs, the Pacific Crest Trail, it's about 2,650 miles. And it goes through Washington, Oregon, and California, right along the ridge of the mountains. So the Sierras and the Cascades. The Appalachian Trail is the AT, and that one most people are more familiar with. It's from Maine to Georgia, right through the Appalachians. And then the CDT is the least familiar. It's more of a route than a trail currently, and it goes through Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. That one's about 3,000 miles with a lot of off-trail options and alternate routes.
So in total, you hiked, what, about 8,000 miles?
About 8,000. Yeah. I've tried to do the exact math, but it gets really tricky.
Yeah, yeah. How about if we measure it this way? How many pairs of shoes did you go through?
Oh, probably, let's see, my best guess would be 13.
13 pairs. Okay, let's measure it this way. How many steps in total do you think that was?
Oh,
Have you ever
steps.
tried to calculate it?
Yeah, on the CDT, I wore my Garmin watch because it tracked my steps and it was somewhere like the millions every month. So,
Yeah, I just did like some quick math here because I think I take about 1,500 or 2,000 steps per mile. So it's somewhere around 12 or 15 million steps, perhaps.
that sounds about right.
That's crazy. Okay, so I gotta ask, which was your favorite trail?
Oh, right. Oh, it's so hard to choose. And I feel like I grew a lot as I hiked them. So there's something so special about the PCT where I started and where I learned so much about myself and the wilderness and how to backpack. I usually skip right over the AT. It's valuable, but definitely not my favorite. My favorite would probably be the CDT, but it's so hard because I was so experienced at that time. I could pull off 30, even 40-mile days, and I just understood the way that my body wanted to move through this trail better, and I had enough experience to kind of take away like the rawness or the surprise of certain factors that got to me on other trails. Yeah. So the CDT, it just felt like I was gliding the whole time.
Explain that, because yeah, I would imagine after two of those trails, you are really experienced. You know what to expect. But what was it that made it feel like you were gliding? It's not just physical conditioning.
I would say it's not just physical conditioning, although that is part of it. I would say that through hiking in general, your body, most able-bodied people are capable. It's a lot of mental preparation. So knowing that at 10 a.m. when I have a blister, I need to stop and take care of it, but the pain is not going to go away, so I'm going to hike through the day. That's something I didn't know how to deal with on the PCT. Like the mental ability to tell that like a blister meant I could keep hiking, but pain in my shins from ligament or muscular damage meant that I should slow down. That kind of knowledge about how my body was functioning helped glide better. I also decreased my pack weight, so I'm carrying less extra material. I knew what kind of foods to fuel with. I knew the way that my body liked to move uphill more than downhill, so I could prepare myself for different parts of the day. A lot of it is really gauging and listening to my body, and it takes time to do that as a through hiker. So on the CDT, I really understood the signs my body was giving me, and so it made it much more of like an easygoing dance than this like brutal push through the pain, eat when I can. Like the PCT mentality just brought me a little bit more suffering.
Okay. Or do you think it was the same amount of suffering, you just are more tolerant of it?
Um, yeah, I mean, probably 50-50. Definitely more tolerant of certain sufferings, but also knowing how to adjust my pack, like it felt more comfortable and knowing what type of shoes to wear, like the relationship you have with your gear also develops, and that would be the part that actually does alleviate suffering, even if your body is still going through like the wear and tear of hiking the miles. There are definite ways to make that easier on yourself by what you wear, how you pack your pack.
Tell us some differences between those three trails from a geography or environment or just what you see.
Of course, they are very different and each beautiful in their own right. The Appalachian Trail was maybe one of the harder trails for me, even though it was the shortest. It has a reputation as the green tunnel. You're covered by trees most of the time, and maybe every 20 or so miles you get a great view. There are some really exceptional parts of the AT, especially up in New Hampshire when you're in the Whites. I value the AT for there's fun hostels along the way and a lot of biodiversity and the Smoky Mountains, and there's a lot of value to it, but I think some of it was lost on me when I had already done the PCT because on the Pacific Crest Trail, man, like you walk through some wilderness zones and there's glaciers to your right and then like mountain goats climbing a cliff to your left, and then you hit the Sierra Nevada and you're hiking through some of the most like remote valleys, and so those two trails are really different, and then the CDT is the most stunning. Like if it was just views, just natural wilderness experience, the CDT takes the cake because starting in Montana and Glacier, it's big sky country. These mountains go forever, and you feel like you're right between the split of the horizon the whole time. And then you get to go through Colorado and hike a bunch of 14,000-foot mountains, feeling like you're on top of the world. And nothing was ever as beautiful as the Continental Divide Trail.
Yeah, I can't explain exactly why, but the CDT, if I were to pick one, I think I would pick that one because I've just always fallen for the epic vistas, being above tree line, massive granite faces, things like that. I really love that sort of scenery.
It's incredible. I will say the one other difference I want to highlight between, especially the AT and the CDT, because those are Like the CDT is often referred to as the hardest of the Triple Crown, mostly because of how remote all the town stops are. So when you're through hiking, you have your basic gear in your pack, and every couple of days you have to stop in and get food. On the Appalachian Trail, it's really easy to do that. You have towns every 3 to 6 days. There's roads. It's around a lot of civilization. There are parts on the CDT. There's like a 300-mile stretch broken up by one dirt road that you have to hitch an hour into town on, and you get to this town and there's a gas station where you have to find food for the next 7 days of hiking. So it can be really hard.
Potato chips and Snicker bars.
Yeah, actually, there was one time I did not prepare well, and a lot of other hikers sent a box to the post office in this town, Ledor, and I did not. And I actually lived off of like those chewy granola bars and honey buns for like way too long, too many days.
You learn. If you did it again, you'd do it differently, but
Yeah,
I don't think
absolutely.
you're going to do it again, are you?
Oh, there's a chance.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to come to that. So let me go back. So you said you really didn't have much outdoors activity as a kid, and then you went on a backpacking trip in high school. And it seems that maybe that was the trip that sparked this massive change in your life. Can you just elaborate on that trip and what happened there?
Oh, absolutely. I, as I said, grew up in Texas, but there's this backpacking camp in Colorado that I found it on a Google search of all places. Like just some angsty 14-year-old girl who was like, I need to get out of this town, I guess. But my parents let me go and I took a plane ride to this camp. They picked me up. We went camping for a week. I had never been above 6,000 feet, and suddenly we're hiking this like 13,000-foot mountain. I never slept in a tent before. And this group just completely outfits like 10 teenagers to go hike with two guides. We spend a lot of the week doing intentional conversations around campfires. There's a lot of like relating the mountain and its challenges to our everyday life and understanding how much capacity nature has to be a metaphor for our daily life. Anyway, I went back home and was like, this is it. Like, I feel so empowered that I could hike a mountain, that I could face an actual challenge, and then go back home to high school. And nothing was harder than hiking up that mountain. I mean, I don't know, playing soccer at high school. Nothing was that hard. But then I continued to be really involved and went back the next summer. Yeah, it was really incredible.
What was the camp?
It's called Beyond Timberline. Camp Timberline is in like Estes Park area, and then they have a section of it, and it's called Go Beyond, Beyond Timberline. They're great.
I guess I had maybe a bit of a similar experience when I was a kid with a YMCA Camp Minojan, an outdoor wilderness camp for canoeing and backpacking in northern Minnesota. And it it really changed the trajectory of my life. And it's partly why I'm doing a podcast like this now. And it sounds like you had a similar change. So what chord did it strike in you?
Um, from a very young age, I've been really independent, really driven, really curious. And in Texas, that came out in a lot of ways. I was like a good student. I ran and played soccer, and it felt like I wanted to merge together this like curiosity and a mental capacity and this like athleticism. And I was never like really athletic. So when I was able to be outside, and there's something about hiking, especially when I started to through hike, where it takes a lot of like strategic mental capacity to think through, to plan, and also like a feat of athleticism. And I ate that up. It was like my mind and my body were on the same page, and it was hiking or surviving or navigating in a way that like city life can offer that to you in parts. Like you have your job and then you have your athletic class, whatever. I really loved that it did all of those things for me at once as I was hiking.
Wow. So you were 14 when you first put a backpack on your back and climbed a mountain and camped in a tent at age 14. And Grace, how old are you now?
I'm 25.
Okay, and you're okay if I broadcast that, right?
Yeah, of course.
You're a spring chicken. It really did set you on a new and different trajectory that looks like it's pretty solid.
Yeah, and I think the trip when I was 14 was really inspiring, and it got me into these like group backpacking spaces, and I would spend my summers doing that. But it really wasn't, or I guess no one expected me to through hike when I left college because the transition from backpacking in a group setting through a camp to like going off by myself to walk for months at a time in one direction is like a whole nother level that even though my parents and my friends knew I wanted to be outside, and it was kind of like I was a camp person. I liked summer camp and backpacking was just part of that. And then my senior year of college, I wrote a thesis on through hiking as sacred pilgrimage. And suddenly I was talking about like the ways that humans as spiritual beings need to be outside, and like taking that with my biology degree to talk about like human evolution to put us in the outdoors. And I started taking it seriously as like an absolute way of life and not just a hobby. And people were shocked that I would, yeah, want to become nomadic.
And so you wrote this senior thesis having not done a through hike, only having done a lot of backpacking in groups. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I saw it as a bit of like research. When people prepare to do a through hike, a lot of their research is about certain trail towns or certain mileage, what type of wilderness areas they'll be in, a lot of the logistics. And mine was like, what does it mean to be human? And am I migrating just like birds?
Oh,
So
okay.
a bit of a different research. I don't know if it was just research. It was a lot of thought, imaginative ethnography is what my advisor called it.
Oh, I love this. And so then what was it? As you wrote it, you said, "Oh my gosh, I really should do a through hike."
Right. I think that the research or like the thesis project and the through hike were evolving together. I think I just had a lot of philosophical questions about human relationship to land and what that looked like in the modern age and how I had such high hopes that it could look different. So even though I was writing a little bit theoretically about the trail, I was doing a lot of research about other hikers, other pilgrims, looking into various religious concepts of pilgrimage and understanding how humans have been walking really far distances for a long time and what it does for them and what it does for their societies.
Wow. Okay. So you were writing about all of this, and then you said, by golly, I better go try one.
Yeah, exactly. I thought I better put this to practice. And so I got into through hiking not for the sport or for the through hike. Like I never met another through hiker. I didn't know that people were out. I had no idea the amount of people that were through hiking. Not that there's a lot, but I kind of saw myself as this like individual on a sort of quest, or like I was doing all of this thought and needed to put it to practice. So it was very different than the typical through hiker who's like taking a gap year or doing a bucket list item or any other option of like being outside for the sake of it. I was like, I need to be outside for the sake of my own thoughts and for what I want out of like the purpose of life.
There's a book, a little bit of a tangent. I don't know if you ever heard of a book called Braiding Sweetgrass
Oh, absolutely.
by,
I got to meet Robin Wall
yeah.
Kimmerer this a couple months ago, actually. She's fantastic.
Because
Yeah.
okay, yeah, my sister, we did a podcast episode with her and her canoeing expedition races, and that's one of her favorite books that she talks about how I think there's a chapter called The Grammar of Animacy and
Hmm.
just how, well, you can describe it better than me, but just how humans really belong in nature and how we're such a part of it.
Absolutely. And it was so incredible being able to meet through hikers because like I saw all of my own ideas reflected back at me. Like I was able to have conversations with other people who wanted to be nomadic, who wanted to, like Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about, braid together like their life with like the pulse of the earth and not
Right.
be so separate from the ecology around us. And it's like really scary to have these thoughts alone and to think that you're doing something out of the ordinary. But all of a sudden, when you're through hiking, like what is ordinary changes. And suddenly I have all sorts of friends who, yeah, understand the way a mountain changes from its north facing side to the south facing side and what animates that mountain, and all sorts of people that I didn't know were out there who were having really similar experiences to me. And maybe they're growing up in a big city like Chicago or New York, Los Angeles, but a lot of them are from small towns who grew up with nature and just want to expand on that, right? It was so fascinating to meet so many other thru hikers who were like right there with me, thinking about life from an ecological perspective.
And you're going to have a lot more to say on this, I think, and I want to get to it. You're at Harvard now doing a graduate program at the Harvard Divinity School. We're going to come back to that topic. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the day in the life on the trail. In some ways, every day is the same as the other, but in some ways, every day is so completely unique. Try to give a little mix of both of those
Hmm.
perspectives.
I'll start by saying this is how I've learned to thru hike, but again, everyone does so differently. I'm quite an eager beaver. I tend to wake up quite early. I pack my bag in 15 minutes or so, and then I start hiking. Not a lot of my other thru hikers did that, so I usually kind of got like a head start. Sometimes I hike with people, and sometimes I don't. So it's not necessarily that it's like we're doing the same miles, but I found that I had a lot of solitude in the early morning. But I would get so tired at like 2. So that's what happened every day is I'd get going early and then I'd get tired in the afternoon and need to stop and refuel and convince myself that the last 5 to 10 miles were worth hiking. And the other constant is that you're always hungry. I am always hungry. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing 20 or 30 miles a day, the body burns, and this is without a pack, roughly 100 calories per mile. So you're burning at least probably 3,000 plus calories just with the hike,
yeah,
above and beyond your normal
my goal was to
caloric need.
eat about 4,000 calories a day, and that would still be deficit for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would think you probably would need five or six. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's hard, actually, surprisingly hard to eat that. Well, some people probably have no problem, but I find it hard to eat 6,000 calories a day, day after day.
It's
It's a lot
hard
of eating.
to carry that much caloric weight in your pack.
Yeah,
So everyone has a different method for carrying that much food. Some people resort to like bringing olive oil and drinking it on really cold nights, or bring a lot of sugar. My go-to method was to just eat like as much as I could in town. Like just stuff myself in town and hope that I could make up a little bit of weight on the days that I had access to more food.
yeah, yeah. I remember you saying at one point when we first started talking that you take quite, and I quote you on this,
Hmm.
because I think it was in writing actually, Grace. I take quite a wild and free approach to the adventures. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Through hiking, well, when I envisioned it, it was a quest, an adventure, something to introduce me to the mountains. But for many other people, it's much more of an athletic feat than that. So there's a lot of logistics that go into planning what type of gear you're taking. There's a large part of the community weighs out everything in their pack and has like quantifiable numbers to talk to you about how much their tent weighs, how much their entire pack weighs. They know exactly how many miles until the next town, how much vert they're hiking, what the town is after that, like all these details, right? And it can be so overwhelming that you're thinking more and more about how you're going to get through the hike and what's up ahead. And that sometimes I find people are paying less attention to like the waterfall or the mountain or the bear that's right in front of them. And so from very early on, I decided that, you know what, the logistics, they'll work themselves out. And I get to be here and now. I just decided to worry a little bit less.
I've done trips like this both ways. I think I like your way better. I think I like the just go.
Me too. It's just walking. I mean, it's one step
Yeah.
after the other. It gets complicated when there's rain. It gets complicated when there's not. a grocery store for another 100 miles, but for the most part, it's just walking.
It always works out, doesn't it?
hmm And that's also to say that like there's a lot of knowledge about how to hike and how to prepare yourself, and people will talk to you about like the 10 essentials of backpacking. And there's a pretty steep learning curve when it comes to through hiking. So I recognize that I'm like very lucky to like know how to read a map and what the topography looks like ahead and how to make do with just a tarp and know how to set that tarp up instead of a tent, right? There's a lot of learned knowledge that comes along with being able to be a little bit more free in my thinking, and like I will make it to the next town one way or another because that's not the same way that other people's minds work, and they tend to be more precautionary.
Well, for those who do like to plan,
hmm
and maybe you looked at this before you went, Grace, I don't know, but there's a website,
Ah, hmm
halfwayanywhere.com, that is really brilliant. The gentleman who prepares every year an annual Pacific Crest Trail survey and an annual Continental Divide Trail survey. And I've looked at that the last couple of few years, just amazing amount of detail on hundreds of people who submit their survey. I don't know if I hope you did
Yeah,
because
I've
I can
submitted
see all this.
surveys. He doesn't do it for the AT, but I've Mac is great. He's great. We
And so
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
looking at at this year's PCT. I just want to talk about like the people you met along the way, Grace, and how you view that trail community. So just a couple quick stats: 55% male, 44% female. The age, when you hiked it, you were in I guess probably the 20 to
hmm
24. So it's like 10% in that 20 to 24. Half are between 25 and 35. So it's a common age, but there's a lot of people, like there's 13% in their 50s. 10% of the hikers were in their 60s.
hmm
You get some in their 70s. I think that's so cool.
It's
You
awesome.
get a hugely disproportionate number of whites, so very few underrepresented minorities, which is kind of
hmm
sad. It would be great to see more ethnic mix out there. Education, I thought was really, really interesting. Like it's about 75% have college or more.
hmm
Almost 80% have college or more in terms of, so it's a very educated group. Tell me what you thought of your fellow through hikers.
I definitely had a different experience than most people. I hiked all three trails southbound, which is the minority, and like the very slim minority. So on the AT, about 5% or less of people hike southbound. On the CDT, that number's a little bigger. So because of that, I had less people on trail with me. I did get to meet all the northbound hikers that passed by me. So I did
But
get
it'd be
to,
brief.
but it would be brief,
Yeah.
right? And because of that, I was much more familiar with like the small cluster of southbound hikers, and all that data seems quite accurate both ways. I would say the ability to take 5 months, maybe longer, off of work, making money, to go. I mean, hang out in the woods. It's a lot more than hanging out in the woods, right? But you're not being like productive to society. If you're married, you're leaving your partner behind. Like a lot of people have kids, so it makes sense to me that so many people are young.
Yeah.
People that are college educated, I've met so many people with PhDs or taking a break between their master's and their PhD, right? Lots of like really intelligent, really white, usually wealthy people are through hiking. And that's kind of true with like outdoor recreation in general. And like I also like I'm getting my master's. Like I come from a middle class family. Like I'm white. Like a lot of those demographics are true to me as well.
Would you say the majority of people are hiking solo, or what's the mix on
I would say that
group?
most people start alone. Yeah, but maybe like 75-25%. Like, but what happens really early on, especially for northbound hikers, is that they group up into what they call a tramily, a trail family. So you're
Yeah.
hiking with people, you start seeing them every couple of days, you're doing the same mileage, or you run into them in town and you really like their vibe or whatever. And big groups will start to form. The year that I hiked the AT, there was a group of like 30 people hiking together on the AT going northbound, and they all wore like these jorts and like their initiation was like, I mean, some of it has got to be myth, right? Like, I'm like, you guys have an initiation, but they were like supposedly like chugging a gallon of milk. And then, I mean, like, whatever. It becomes like this whole like fraternity level tramily, right? As a southbounder, I'm like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah,
absolutely
I can
not.
tell that's not your thing. Hey,
So
each to their own. What's cool is that the trail can support both, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I to this day keep in touch with so many friends from the trail, some of my closest friends I've met while hiking. Like, I believe that anyone out there doing a through hike has some sort of like appreciation for Earth and wants to be outside doing this cool through hike.
It's definitely got to be a group of people with a lot of shared values.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I've always said that life is made of memories, and those memories could be great memories or bad memories. It comes down to if you go through every day in life with nothing memorable, no real highs or lows, then 10, 20, 30, 50 years later, it's like everything is just one big mushy blur. Can you describe a couple of your real standout memories, whether they're good or bad?
So many memories come to mind, both great and joyous and also really challenging. And oftentimes they're close to one another. But thinking a little bit at the start of my journey, when I mean, I started the PCT when I was 21, and I started a little bit too early, and Washington was so snowy and so icy. And I had micro spikes and my ice axe just to hike every day. For about 2 weeks, I was hiking through snow, kicking steps, the first person to set footprints that year. And I was self-arresting. There were many times I'd walk across some snow and I'd start falling, and I'd have to use my ice axe to like catch myself in the ice. And yeah, just how brutal it was to be out hiking. And yeah, that's a little bit of like the suffering where, as an experienced through hiker, I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, like, it's okay to wait for the snow to melt. Like, you're in no rush. But I thought that's what through hiking was. I was like, this must be what it's like all the time. So that was really hard. But then, like, when I finally did in Southern Washington get to experience Mount Hood in all her glory, watching the sunset, and I was just absolutely by myself for that moment because no other hikers were around me, it was stunning. So that's like one moment where I can see quite clearly how close those two things were related, where because I trudged through the snow for so long, I got to be by myself on trail. Another terrible one was when I was in Colorado. I was hiking with a friend, and we got stuck in this snowstorm. The skies were like black, and we didn't want to approach the 12,000-foot pass we needed to go over. So we decided to like pitch our tent and wait out the storm. So we sat in this like tiny two-person tent, both of us, for 20 hours. We stayed in this tent just waiting for the
Wow.
storm to pass. And because you only pack enough food for the days you're out there, and we weren't actively hiking, we had to really ration our food. So I'm just starving, like ravenous, like getting cabin fever in this tiny tent, while it like hails on us for 20 hours. And finally, the skies turned from black to like light gray, and we decided to scurry up the pass. And as we did so, we just started trudging through snow and ice, and then having to go back down the other side, just like slipping and sliding down like ice covered rocks. It was some of the sketchiest hiking I'd ever done. So moments like that, when the mountain reminds you that you are just human and you don't really belong in these like wilderness areas all the time, when there's like scary weather patterns you can't control. Like, those reminders are so humbling, but like so necessary, because it's right at the moments where you're like, I could do anything, that the weather's like, nope, sit down, stay in the tent for 20 hours.
I struggle with stories like this because this podcast is supposed to make people inspired to go out and do something like that. And yet, what you're
Yeah,
describing, that stuff happens. You have some really miserable days, and how do you convince someone that that's so worth it? And so,
yeah.
take a crack at that, Grace. Why do you do these things, and what makes it worth it for you, and why should it be worth it for someone else to try?
this gets out to like, why do I want to through hike? There is nothing else that could like appease me to be able to experience the raw beauty and simultaneous terror of that storm, like reminded me how human I was. And a little bit of it is like this type 2 fun where like, yeah, I'm here to experience it, but I also like planned accordingly. I chose the safe decision and never have I like seen a mountain so moody before. So I get to understand this mountain and like now I have a relationship with her and can speak to that as well. And then there's also moments when I'm hiking across this great traverse and I look back and as you look north, everything in your vision you have hiked. Like my footsteps have been connected to Canada and this few moments that are lows where I'm like, oh wow, I'm humbled by what it means to be human in comparison to a mountain. But then 2 days later, being on top of another mountain 40 miles away and feeling so empowered and capable, it's this give and take with the landscape itself where just as I'm listening to my body, I'm also listening to the earth and saying, oh, now is not a time to go hike up to this great height, but there will be another time where I will be allowed to pass and move on. And that
Yeah.
relationship that I get to form with the mountain is so life giving to me. It's absolutely the very reason I would sit in a tent in a snowstorm and get to dance along frozen rocks the next morning because that adrenaline, that life that it brings me to like, ooh, okay, how am I going to get out of this? Kind of the same thing as like mind and body just being brought so drastically together. I feel that my life was threatened very few times. I never faced death in a sincere way, but I faced challenges that like brought my adrenaline up to like do the thing I needed to do in that moment.
I love the way you described that. Grace, a lot of what you're talking about, kind of the connectedness with Earth. So you're at Harvard Divinity School now. I don't know exactly what prompted you to go there, but it sounded like you're taking some pretty cool classes and not necessarily what I would think of at a divinity school. So explain a little bit about what you're studying and how that relates to the through hiking you did.
Of course, of course. When I finished the CDT, I was kind of pondering with like a big what's next, right? Like I could keep hiking forever and love it, but I've always kind of felt like there was another bigger adventure out there for me. That like being on trail was like a preparation of some kind. And I don't know what's next still in any grand way, although I am itching to get outside and hike some more. But everything that through hiking taught me is about relationship. It's about my relationship to the land, to like local spaces, to specific plants, to specific mountains. And that doesn't seem to be the framework that a lot of the Western world, a lot of the United States is working with. And so it felt like peculiar to me. And I have a degree in biology and a degree in global sustainability. So I'm very familiar with ecology, with the climate crisis. Like I think a lot about the land, but I needed to think more about humans' relationship to the land specifically. So I applied to graduate programs, hoping to do something where I could get a dual degree in like religious studies and forestry. So like Yale has a really cool program that does both. And my advisor, professor from my undergrad was like, you've got to apply to Harvard. When I got in, I started to really consider the differences. And the special thing about Harvard's divinity school is that it is not religiously affiliated. So most divinity schools in the United States is particular to a certain religion, usually Christianity, right? Like it's a form of seminary.
Mm-hmm.
People go to school and they
Uh-huh.
become a pastor. But Harvard's is non-specific. So you can attend Harvard and not be religious at all. You could attend Harvard and want to do Buddhist chaplaincy specifically, and they will gear the curriculum to do just that for you. And it's
Okay.
awesome. So that's why I was like, ultimately, I was like, whoa, I have to come here. They don't have a forestry school. So it was a bit of a give and take where like I get to study religion, not from a Christian perspective, but I can study eco spirituality and I can do so across traditions. I can take classes at like Harvard, other Harvard schools and apply them to my religious studies degree. And I can study botany and Native American studies and like sociology classes, and I can take all of these courses to kind of create a curriculum in which I'm studying human relationship to the land. It's been so phenomenal. One of my favorite parts is there's a reading group that I'm a part of called Thinking with Plants and Fungi, and it's about plant consciousness. It's so great. We like talk about plants and how they're aware and like the personhood that we can attribute to, yeah, plants and fungus. And I take it to rivers and mountains and forests. So I've started talking about forests as if they were a friend of mine and rivers as if they were people worthy of liberation. And it's been a really fun way to put into words and express through papers a lot of these ideas that like came to me while I was hiking.
On that one, I have to admit it seems a little far out to me, and it probably seems a little far out to a lot of the listeners.
Absolutely.
Elaborate on that a little bit, like, because this stuff is serious. Like, I mean, you're taking it seriously, and it's a actual course at Harvard. So,
Right.
what is it? What is it all about? What is
Yeah,
the?
absolutely. Yeah, man, I have to refrain from using big words. Basically,
Oh, use some big words and confuse the heck out of me. That's
yeah,
okay.
absolutely. I think a lot about epistemology, right? Which is like this understanding of how we take for granted so much of what we're socialized into thinking, and how when we trace back our thoughts, we have to really consider what has shaped our norm in society. So for the United States, even if we're going through like a secularization and not a lot of people are Christian, a lot of our core values and morals and our ethics, they come from a Christian mindset. And in all Abrahamic traditions, there's this commonly accepted idea of like land as property that a lot of other religious traditions never experienced. And I think you see that a lot with like paradigm clashes with like colonialism in like North America, when the indigenous people, they had a different relationship to the land where certain plants and animals spoke to them, and there's this animacy there, right? And they didn't believe that the land was something to be owned, but that the relationships between trees and plants and animals and mountains and rocks were something that they like took care of, and in turn those beings took care of them, so giving a voice to these more than human entities. And through discovery, exploration, colonization, all these other things, settlers decided that like ownership of property was like the fundamental expansion to the West, right? I'm getting into like all this history, but it plays a role today when we're looking at like national parks as something to be owned and debated and fought over. And we're losing a lot of our value in wilderness and wild spaces because we deem them something to be owned and controlled and not an entity of its own. I believe that like rivers are capable of changing and expressing themselves based on what their surroundings are. I'm not naive to think that trees or rivers would speak in a human language, but that humans are capable of hearing nature's language. And we have to like reframe the way we think about our relationship with these more than human beings, and not just accept that like the Western idea of ownership that extends to everything land based, so stones and plants and animals, is worthy of being owned and controlled, but that it has its own inherent value apart from what humans gain from it.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's heavy. And now I can see why my first reaction was, gee, Grace, that seems really far out. But it is exactly because our entire society and cultural basis is different.
Right.
And yet there are some societies and cultures that do and did see it that way. And yeah,
Right. And
that's a great explanation.
I was raised in a Christian household, and I grew up in the United States, and like I have no reason to think differently. Like I grew up in the same culture and societal upbringing as most people. But there was
Yeah.
something so special to me about through hiking and how that like cracked open the way that I viewed Earth, the way that I was alone and never felt lonely because I always had the trees to talk to, and the way that like a
Yeah.
mountain caught my breath and made me think differently. Like that was a relationship that I had to investigate.
I'm going to want to read your thesis whenever you are writing one for that. Grace, I've loved this chat. I think our time is up, which is sad. I always have a final question for each of my guests, and that is, what is your next big dream adventure?
Oh wow, yeah, that's that's a great question. Something I've been thinking about a lot is how the trails I've hiked are always man-made and they're great and they put me in like really spectacular places. And I've been thinking a lot about like the natural trails that Earth presents to us and how rivers are this like form of transportation of some kind. Like I can flow along a river and it's entirely made by Earth. So I want to get into some like water traveling and turn through hiking into like through paddling.
Well, I've got a canoe I could sell you.
Literally. I need to practice.
Well, I've got a couple episodes on paddling that are already out there, and I've got some more in the pipeline. So maybe I'll give you some ideas. Well, Grace, thank you so much for today. I was enthralled by your descriptions, and I'm jealous of what you've accomplished. Fantastic. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Dale. It's been a pleasure to talk about these things I'm so passionate about and put a voice to my hiking and my studies. And it's been really wonderful to share.
All right, you have a good day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. If you like the show, there's nothing more valuable to me than you following it and sharing it with others. I drop a new episode every Friday, so tune in again for another great adventure story. And check out the accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, and then go seize the day and live your dream.